She kept a single photograph in a shoebox under her bed for 6 years. Not in a frame. Not on the mantel. Under the bed, in the dark, where she could take it out alone and hold it and put it back without anyone knowing she had looked. The photograph was of her granddaughter Naomi at 6 months old, dark-curled, round-cheeked, laughing at something off camera, and it had been left on Margaret Ellison's porch in a plain envelope by her son David without a note. Because David had decided that silence was the kindest thing he could offer his mother after she had sat in the hospital room where Naomi was born and refused to hold her. Steve Harvey learned about the shoebox on a Family Feud stage in Atlanta on a rainy Tuesday in March from Naomi herself, 6 years old now, in a yellow dress, who climbed up onto the podium step to reach the microphone and said, in the particular clear voice of a child who does not understand why any of this is complicated, "My grandma keeps my picture in a box, but now she holds me." Steve Harvey knelt down on the floor of his own stage. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. He stayed down there for 37 seconds. What came next, what Naomi said, what Margaret did, what Steve arranged, would be seen by 293 million people and make a 6-year-old girl the most talked-about child in the history of Family Feud. She had been backstage for 9 minutes, standing in the corridor outside the Family Feud stage, holding her grandmother, Margaret's hand. Margaret Ellison was 71, white-haired, small, with the deliberate, upright posture of a woman who had decided how she was going to hold herself through a difficult thing and was holding herself that way. Naomi was 6, mixed race, with her mother Aisha's dark curls and her father David's gray eyes, and she had been told this was a television game show and she was going to be on it. And she had accepted this as fully as 6-year-olds accept things that are presented with confidence. She was holding Margaret's hand because Naomi held everyone's hand in new places. She had been holding Margaret's hand for 8 months. Margaret held on. It was a Tuesday in March when the Ellison family walked out onto the stage. David and Aisha, Naomi, David's brother Paul, and Margaret, who walked out last and sat in the family section rather than at the podium because Paul had taken her spot. Steve saw Margaret the moment she came through the curtain. He noticed the posture. He noticed the hand. He made his joke about Naomi's dress. He asked Naomi if she was ready. She said she had practiced her buzzer face. He crouched down and said, "Show me." She showed him. He said, "That is the best buzzer face I have ever seen in 45 years. Naomi said, "Thank you. I've been working on it." The audience was completely charmed. Aisha smiled. David held Aisha's hand at the podium. Margaret, in the family section behind them, sat with her hands folded in her lap and looked at her granddaughter's back and breathed the particular slow breath of someone who is paying a debt they cannot pay fast enough. Nobody in that studio knew yet about the shoebox. But what she said next would change everything. But not in the way anyone expected. The origin was a hospital room in Baltimore, 6 years ago, the February morning Naomi Rose Ellison was born. David had called his mother from the hospital parking lot the night before to tell her Aisha was in labor, and Margaret had driven 3 hours from her home in Hagerstown and arrived at the hospital at 7:14 in the morning. She sat in the maternity waiting room for 4 hours. She drank coffee from the vending machine. She thought, during those 4 hours, about what she was going to do. She had known Aisha for 2 years. She had been polite to Aisha. She had not been welcoming. She had told David, 2 months into the relationship, that she wasn't sure this was wise. She had told him, at the engagement, that she hoped he'd thought it through. She had said these things in the tone of someone who believed they were being measured and reasonable, rather than being cruel in slow motion. She had attended the wedding. She had been polite. She had sent a gift when Aisha's pregnancy was announced. A white onesie. No card. David came to the waiting room at 11:30. He said, "Mom, she's here. Come meet Naomi." Margaret stood. She followed him down the corridor. She walked into the room where Aisha was in the bed, exhausted and radiant, holding a 7-pound, 4-ounce baby with dark curls and gray eyes. She looked at her granddaughter. She stood at the foot of the bed. David said, "Mom, do you want to hold her?" Margaret said, "I'll let you all have your time." David said, "Mom?" She said, "I'm fine here." Aisha looked at her husband. David looked at his mother. He said, "Quietly, Mom." "Please," she said. "I'm fine, David." She stayed for 22 minutes. She said the baby was beautiful. She said this once, standing at the foot of the bed, before she said she needed to start the drive home before dark. She left before Naomi's first feeding. David drove back to Baltimore 3 days later with Aisha and Naomi and did not call his mother for 2 weeks. When he called, she asked how the baby was. He told her. She said the baby sounded wonderful. He said, "Mom, you didn't hold her." She said, "David." He said, "I need you to think about what you're doing." She said, "I'm not doing anything." He said, "That's what I mean." He hung up. He left the photograph on her porch 6 weeks later. No note. Just the photograph, in a plain envelope, Naomi at 6 months laughing. He did not tell Aisha he had done this. Aisha found out later, from something Margaret said, and understood what David had been trying to do, and loved him more for it. Margaret put the photograph under the bed. She took it out in the evenings sometimes. She told herself it was just a photograph. She told herself many things over those 6 years that she has since stopped telling herself. The turning point came quietly. The way real changes come, not in a dramatic moment, but in an accumulation of small moments that eventually tip. David had kept Naomi from his mother for the first 18 months, not formally, not as a declared position, just as an outcome of not arranging visits and not accepting invitations. Margaret called on Naomi's first birthday. David answered. She asked if she could speak to Naomi. He said Naomi was napping. She said, "David, I'd like to see her." He said, "Mom, I know." He did not make a plan. The first visit happened when Naomi was 2.5. Margaret drove to Baltimore on a Saturday. She sat in David and Aisha's living room. Naomi came in from the backyard with dirt on her knees and grass in her curls, and looked at Margaret with the unself-conscious directness of a 2-year-old, and said, "Who are you?" Margaret said, "I'm your grandma." Naomi said, "Okay," and climbed up onto the couch next to her because the couch was there and Naomi climbed on everything. She sat next to Margaret and watched cartoons for 40 minutes and fell asleep with her head on Margaret's arm. Margaret sat very still for the full 40 minutes. She did not move her arm. When Naomi fell asleep, she looked at the top of her head, the dark curls, the gray-eyed child who had not asked any questions about what Margaret had done and had simply climbed up next to her, and something in Margaret's chest that had been held very tight for 2.5 years slowly, quietly began to let go. She came back the following month. And the month after that. She told no one what was changing. She did not make speeches. She did not apologize in formal terms. She showed up. She held Naomi. She learned how Naomi liked her eggs. She drove 3 hours each way, 12 times over the following 2 years, and she did not count the miles, because some things you do not keep a ledger on. Aisha watched all of it. She said nothing about the hospital room. she had decided that the most useful thing she could do was let her daughter have her grandmother, and that the grandmother would build the relationship, or she wouldn't, and that Naomi would teach Margaret more than Aisha ever could. She was right. She had taken the photograph out from under the bed one evening. Naomi was 5 by now, and looked at it for a long time, and then walked downstairs and put it on the mantel. Just like that. David found it there the next visit. He did not say anything about it. He walked past it into the kitchen and made coffee. Margaret was at the table. He set a cup in front of her. She said, "I'm sorry, David," he said. "I know, Mom," she said. "I have a lot to be sorry for." He said, "Yeah." He sat down across from her. He said, "Naomi loves you." Margaret said, "I know. I don't deserve it." He said, "No. But she's 6. She gives it anyway." They had applied to Family Feud because Paul had signed them up as a surprise, because he knew David needed a day where the whole thing felt like a gift instead of a repair. David had said yes. Aisha had said yes. Naomi had said yes at full volume and immediately began practicing her buzzer face. Steve Harvey would later say that Naomi Ellison was the reason he believed the show could do things that nothing else on television could do. The game was halfway done. The Ellisons were ahead when Steve paused between questions and looked at the family section. He looked at Naomi. He looked at Margaret. He looked at the way Naomi was sitting, pressed against her grandmother's side, legs dangling, one hand holding Margaret's sleeve, and he said, "Can somebody tell me the story of that little girl and that woman right there?" Paul, at the podium, started to speak. Naomi slid off the bench and walked to the podium step and climbed up and reached for the microphone. The studio burst into laughter. Steve crouched down. He said, "Go ahead." Naomi said, "My grandma keeps my picture in a box, but now she holds me." She paused. She thought about what she had said. Then she said, "She holds me a lot now." The studio fell completely silent. 300 people stopped breathing at the same moment. Steve Harvey's face changed. His smile was gone. He looked at Naomi. He looked at Margaret. He looked at Aisha at the podium, who had pressed her lips together and was looking at her daughter and not crying by force of will alone. He knelt down on the floor of the Family Feud stage. He pressed his handkerchief to his face. He stayed there for 37 seconds. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. He stood up. He said, "No game. Not right now. Not yet." A producer stepped in. He held up his hand. He said, "This has never happened on this stage. A 6-year-old just said the most important thing anyone has said on this show in 45 years. He walked to the family section. He stood in front of Margaret. She looked up at him. Her eyes were wet. He said, "You put the photograph on the mantel." She said, "Yes." He said, "How long was it under the bed?" She said, 6 years. He said, "And now?" She said, "She holds my hand in new places." He stood there for a moment. He said to her alone, quietly, "Hold her. She needs you, and you need her." Margaret's jaw tightened. She nodded. He said, "Say it." She said, "I know." He said, "Say it." She said out loud to the room, "I need her." He turned to the cameras. He said, "I want to talk to everyone watching at home. There is a woman named Wanda. There is a grandmother named Margaret, who spent 6 years with a photograph under a bed and then put it on a mantel and drove 3 hours 12 times and learned how a little girl likes her eggs. And that little girl climbed up next to her on a couch and fell asleep because she is 6 years old and does not know that love is supposed to be complicated. An old man at a gas station once told me God's got a plan bigger than your pain. Naomi Ellison is the plan. She always was. He wasn't done. He pulled out his phone and called his personal physician, asking that a full geriatric wellness package, comprehensive annual care, specialist access, and a dedicated care coordinator be established for Margaret Ellison through the Harvey Foundation's Elder Care Program. He said, "She's going to be around for a long time. I want her healthy for it." He ended the call. He announced both families, the Ellisons and the competing family, the Robinsons from Charlotte, were leaving with the full $20,000. The Robinsons crossed the stage. Their grandmother, a woman named Eula, who was 74, sat down next to Margaret in the family section and took her hand. She said, "It takes what it takes, honey," Margaret said. "It took too long." Eula said, "But you got there." The episode aired 8 weeks later. 293 million views. The hashtag #SheHoldsMeALot trended for 10 days in 20 countries. Letters arrived at the Family Feud production office from more than 40,000 grandparents in the first 3 weeks. Some confessing, some celebrating, some asking for help. The show donated all physical letters to a family reconciliation archive at a university research center studying intergenerational family repair. 3 months after the taping, the photograph was still on the mantel. A second photograph joined it. Naomi at 6, in the yellow dress on the Family Feud stage, reaching for the microphone. Margaret put it in a frame, a proper one, with glass. A year after the taping, Naomi started first grade. On the first day of school, the teacher asked the class to draw their family. Naomi drew 7 people. She labeled each one. The 7th figure, at the end of the row, she labeled, "Grandma Margaret. She holds me a lot now." Today, the Holding Arms Foundation, named for what Naomi said under her breath to Steve backstage when he crouched down and asked what she most wanted people to know, provides family mediation and grandparent reconciliation support for families navigating racially motivated estrangement. Its motto is Naomi's own words, "She holds me a lot now." The foundation has served 1,180 families across 14 states and maintains a 24-hour reconciliation support line staffed by trained family mediators. Steve spoke about Naomi in an interview the following year. He said, "She climbed up to the microphone. Nobody told her to. She just climbed up and told the truth. Because she's 6, and 6-year-olds haven't learned yet to be afraid of the truth. And the truth was, my grandma keeps my picture in a box, but now she holds me." That's the whole human story. The box and the holding. And the years between them. 2 years after the taping, on Naomi's 8th birthday, Margaret drove 3 hours from Hagerstown. She brought a cake she had made herself, chocolate, Naomi's favorite, with 8 candles. She carried it to the table. Naomi looked at the cake. She said, "Grandma, you drove all the way here just for cake?" Margaret said, "I drove all the way here for you." Naomi thought about this. She blew out the candles. She said, "Can I have 2 pieces?" Margaret said, "You can have as many as you want." Naomi said, "Good, because you drove a long way, and I think you should have some too." They sat at the table, the grandmother and the granddaughter, and ate chocolate cake together while the candles cooled in their holders. And outside, the box under the bed was empty. And the mantel held 2 photographs in 2 proper frames, and the arms that had once refused to open had been holding on, for 2 years now, with the particular grip of someone who knows exactly what it cost to wait so long to reach. If this story, Naomi's microphone, the shoebox, the mantle, moved you, subscribe and hit that thumbs up. Share this with someone who needs to know that it is never too late to open your arms, and that the people you love will often do the reaching for you anyway. Have you ever watched a child forgive what an adult couldn't? Let us know in the comments. and ring the notification bell for more moments that remind us what it means to finally hold on.